Across the globe, millions of people are feeling let down by their democracies. Trust is crumbling, frustrations are rising, and a single burning question keeps surfacing. How can we fix this? In March 2024, the Pew Research Center asked over 30,000 people in 24 countries this exact question. What would improve the way democracy works in your country? And guess what? A few countries hope for a complete change of leadership, an improved judicial system, or significant economic reform. But by far, the number one answer was clear and simple: better politicians. Let's face it, this response speaks volumes. But better politicians can mean different things to different people. A recent YouGov survey of 2,266 U.S. adult citizens shows that people want leaders who are intelligent and honest, who aren't afraid to make decisions and work with others, but also willing to admit their mistakes. Well, it seems that a politician's physical appearance, ethnicity, and wealth don't matter. There are some significant disagreements when it comes to things like age, religion, sexual orientation, or gender. But over 90% of Americans seem to agree on similar characteristics when it comes to what they are looking for in a good politician. But here's the real question. If we want better politicians, how do we attract them? Some argue that paying them more could bring in top talent, the kind of people who might otherwise take high-paying private sector jobs. But others believe the opposite. Pay them less. They argue that high salaries attract the wrong kind of people, those who are in it for the money, not the mission. So what's the right answer? More pay? Less pay? Or something entirely different? In this video, we'll explore both sides of the debate, dig into what people from around the world think, and see what history, research, and common sense tell us about how to create a better class of leaders. Being a politician is a tough job. The Congressional Management Foundation and Society for Human Resource Management conducted a survey of 1,400 congressional staff and 25 Congress members. According to their report, these politicians work an average of 70 hours per week. Their time is mostly spent on policy work, advising and serving their constituents, campaigning, and dealing with the press. Before we get into the arguments about whether politicians should be paid more or less, let's get a better understanding of how much they are currently earning in countries around the world. Leaders in the US and Canada enjoy some of the highest absolute salaries in the world. The US president earns over $400,000 annually, while Canada's Prime Minister takes home over $290,000. These numbers stand out as hefty investments in political leadership. However, these salaries are relatively modest compared to Switzerland, whose president earns $542,000 per year. This signals that Swiss political culture places a high premium on governance. France and the UK, meanwhile, pay their leaders less, both in absolute terms and relative to GDP per capita, reflecting different societal priorities or economic structures. When we look at members of Parliament or Congress, the story is similar. Countries like the United States, Canada, Australia, Germany, and the United Kingdom pay their average politician a high salary, ranging from $174,000 annually in the United States to $114,000 in the UK. In contrast, France, Sweden, and Mexico maintain lower MP salaries, potentially due to more constrained public budgets or differing expectations of parliamentary roles. As we've seen, politicians in most Western countries, and the US and Canada in particular, are well compensated relative to their peers. And this hasn't gone unnoticed with the voting public. But not everybody is upset about how much politicians are being paid. In fact, many people argue that politicians' compensation should be increased. The argument for increasing political salaries generally fall into three categories. Firstly, they argue that more money is needed to attract quality talent who have more lucrative options in the private sector. Secondly, they argue that higher pay reduces the incentive for politicians to seek alternative, and often questionable, ways of making money on the side. Thirdly, they argue that higher compensation is desirable as long as it is tied to greater measurability and accountability. Let's take a look at the research on whether paying politicians more money improves the pool of available talent and ultimately leads to better performance. There have been many studies on this very question. A 2009 report by Stefano Gagliarducci and Tommaso Nannicini collected data on every Italian mayor over a 9-year period. The study looked at how raising mayors' salaries affected who ran for office and how well they did their jobs. It found that higher pay attracted more skilled and educated mayors, who made local government more efficient. The study measured more skilled mayors by their education level or years of schooling and professional background, focusing on whether they came from high-skilled occupations like lawyers, professors, or entrepreneurs. Efficiency was assessed by examining reductions in government spending, especially on goods, services, and personnel, lower taxes and tariffs, and improved administrative performance, such as speeding up revenue collection processes. A study from 2020 by Tom Real Hegedal, Leif Helland, and Rebecca Morton explored whether paying politicians higher salaries can reduce corruption. Using both theoretical models and controlled laboratory experiments, the researchers examined how wages and uncertainty affect political behavior, especially rent-taking, which is using public office for private gain. The study found that higher salaries reduce corruption because they make the job more attractive to honest candidates, while also increasing the risk for corrupt politicians of losing a well-paying job if they're caught. Essentially, the reward for staying honest outweighs the benefit of being corrupt. A 2013 study by Ernesto Dalbao, Federico Finan, and Martin Rossi looked at how higher pay helps recruit better people for government jobs in Mexico. They randomly offered 2 salary levels, 3,750 or 5,000 pesos per month, and tested applicants on intelligence, personality, and motivation for public service. They found that higher pay attracted smarter, more experienced, and more motivated people. These conclusions become less surprising when you get some perspective on how little politicians are paid relative to the private sector. Todd Gloria, the mayor of San Diego since 2020, manages operations and policy for a city with a population of about 1.4 million people. He is responsible for an annual budget of over $2 billion and oversees roughly 12,000 employees working in the municipal government. Let's take a look at some private sector CEOs with similar levels of responsibility, both in terms of employee headcount and financials. Sage is the world's 3rd largest supplier of enterprise resource planning software, behind Oracle and SAP. In 2023, Sage generated about $2.7 billion in revenue and has approximately 11,800 employees across 23 countries. Their CEO, Steve Hare, brought home almost $5.2 million. Mantech International is an American defense contracting company that provides technology and services to U.S. government departments. In 2021, the company generated just over $2.5 billion in revenue and has approximately 10,000 employees across 19 U.S. states and 20 countries internationally. Their chairman, Kevin Phillips, took home approximately $3.8 million. Meanwhile, Mayor Todd Gloria earns an annual salary of $218,678. That's just 4% of what Sage's CEO earned in 2023. There is a country that serves as an example of what can happen when a society decides to pay their politicians comparable wages to their top private sector earners. If we go back and take a look at this chart again, comparing actual salary to GDP per capita, take a look at Singapore. Since its founding, Singapore's per capita income has skyrocketed nearly 100-fold, fueled by efficient governance, strategic trade positioning, and a merit-based public sector that attracts top talent with competitive pay. As of 2023, Singapore's GDP per capita even surpasses that of the United States. But this economic success comes with a political trade-off. Singapore's ruling People's Action Party, or the PAP, has maintained power since 1959, shaping a system where opposition growth is stifled and media freedom is tightly controlled. Elections face criticism for unfair advantages favoring the PAP, including legal and media biases that limit dissent. While the results are undeniable, the balance between prosperity and political freedom in Singapore remains a complex story. Now, let's take a look at how higher compensation might discourage unethical behavior and reduce conflicts of interest. If our politicians are paid too little, then why are so many of them incredibly wealthy? Politicians seem to be able to consistently beat the market when it comes to investing. Do they know something we don't know? The US lobbying industry was worth over $4 billion in 2023, and politicians seem to be taking their share of that pie. And finally, the reality is that many of these politicians were already wealthy when they entered office. Let's take a look at investing. Several US politicians significantly outperformed the SPDR Index, which is an exchange-traded fund that tracks the performance of the 500 largest publicly traded companies in the US. Technically, it is illegal for anybody, including politicians, to buy or sell stocks based on information that has not been disclosed to the public. Yet there are several prominent examples of potential insider trading. According to the watchdog website unusualwhales.com, the Republican senator from Alabama, Tommy Tuberville, disclosed $250,000 in futures trading wheat, corn, soy, and cattle in August 2023. This, despite the fact that he sits on the Senate Committee for Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. He also purchased $45,000 of stock in a company called Huma, right as the war in Ukraine began. Huma's stock price then suddenly increased by 37% when their medical technology was used for tissue implants during the war. Senator Tuberville sits on the Armed Services Committee. During the summer of 2022, reports surfaced that Nancy Pelosi was trading millions of dollars in Nvidia stock ahead of a congressional vote on a semiconductor bill backed by the Biden administration.
Because this is a free market and we're a free market economy, they should be able to participate in that.
In September, prior to the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, Kevin Hahn invested in Raytheon, a prominent defense contractor. Additionally, he acquired shares in 4 energy companies: NextEra Energy, ExxonMobil, Pioneer Natural Resources, and Devon Energy. Over the past year, Hearn's investments totaled up to $6 million, all while serving as a member of the House Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources. Now, let's take a look at lobbying. Lobbying is a big business in the US worth over $4.2 billion in 2023. According to a research paper by Jeff Lazarus and Lindsay Herbal, over 33% of House members and 60% of senators become registered lobbyists when they leave office. And almost 60% of former members of the 115th U.S. Congress, which ran from 2017 to 2019, now work for a lobbying firm or lobbying client. The top spending lobbying groups in 2023 included many companies you'll be familiar with, including Amazon, Meta, Boeing, Google, General Motors, Pfizer, and Lockheed Martin. Politicians are heavily incentivized to nurture relationships with major lobbying firms as they offer a path to significant wealth after a politician retires from public office. According to The Nation magazine, Congress members can earn over 10 times as much per year in the lobbying business. Former Democratic Senator Chris Dodd of Connecticut earns about $1.5 million a year as the chief lobbyist for the movie industry. After leaving the Senate in 2010, he joined the Motion Picture Association of America, representing major studios like Warner Brothers and Universal. Former Senator Tom Daschle brings in over $2.1 million as an unregistered lobbyist, along with additional income from speaking engagements and consulting. Former Congressman Billy Tauzin earned nearly $20 million as a lobbyist for pharmaceutical companies from 2006 to 2010. After pushing through President Bush's prescription drug expansion in Congress, Tauzin retired and became the head of PHRMA, representing companies like Pfizer and Bayer. During the health reform debate, he played a key role in protecting policies that prevented Medicare from negotiating drug prices. Not all politicians earned their fortunes through extremely well-timed investment strategies or behind-the-scenes deals with lobbyists. The reality is that our political systems and institutions are biased towards wealth. Not many people can afford to take years off work and away from their families to campaign for office. Besides that obvious factor, political parties are not exactly reluctant to embrace large sums of money and networks of other rich and powerful friends. In most cases, suggested increases in compensation for politicians comes with some proposed conditions designed to hold them accountable to the citizens. Some of the most common proposals tie increased salary for politicians to reduced government size. This argument suggests that fewer representatives are required, and the total number of elected officials could be reduced if we revisited the electoral maps that have largely been rigged through gerrymandering for decades. More on that in a future video. This would keep the cost of government down, while ideally attracting more qualified candidates who act in the best interest of citizens. Another popular argument suggests we tie any potential increase in compensation to performance or ethics-based standards. For example, members of Congress could be paid a bonus for each piece of legislation they worked closely on, or payment could be deferred for several years and make it conditional on achieving certain metrics. Other suggestions would require politicians to disclose their financial interests, campaign contributions, and expenditures to ensure transparency and reduce corruption. It is incredibly unpopular to argue that politicians should get a raise. If they were being honest, most people would likely complain about how much their ineffective and unrepresentative politicians are earning. Fortunately for them, there is some research to back up their point of view. A 2012 National Bureau for Economic Research study looked at how changes in salary affect the behavior of members of the European Parliament, using a reform that equalized salaries across countries. Before 2009, MEP salaries varied, but after the reform, all MEPs earned about €84,000. The study focused on how salary changes impacted the likelihoods of incumbents running for re-election, their effort while in office, and the quality of new candidates. It found that higher salaries attracted more candidates, but did not improve their quality, as it broadened the pool, including less qualified individuals. Additionally, salary increases did not lead to more effort from politicians already in office. A 2015 study by Mitchell Hoffman and Elizabeth Lyons suggests that increasing salaries for politicians may not be a good idea, especially if the goal is to improve performance. By analyzing 60 years of data, the researchers explored whether higher wages made politicians more competitive in elections, improved their legislative productivity, or attracted better candidates. While higher pay did attract more candidates, it did not attract higher quality candidates, and it did not lead to significantly better legislative outcomes. In fact, the study found that salary increases did not encourage politicians to work harder on legislation, but instead led them to spend more time on activities like fundraising and constituent services. The debate about paying politicians more is complex, with valid points on both sides. On one hand, higher salaries could attract better talent, people who might otherwise choose more lucrative private sector jobs, and reduce the temptation for politicians to engage in shady side deals. On the other hand, the evidence suggests that simply raising wages doesn't guarantee better performance or higher quality candidates. So what's the solution? Is paying more the answer to fixing our political systems? Or is the real issue deeper, perhaps rooted in the system and institutions themselves? What do you think? Should we raise pay or look for a different way to fix democracy? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Politics Reimagined to join us on this journey of exploration and innovation. Together, let's turn the failures of today into the solutions of tomorrow.